find such a love at our age. Whoever thought we could dance on a thrilling...
Welcome to Couples Therapy in 7 Words. I'm your co-host, Judy Alexander, and I'm here with my husband, Dr. Bruce Chalmers.
Well, hello, Judy. Hello, viewers and listeners. And Judy, tell folks, what is the title of today's episode?
Recovering from Betrayal Trauma, an interview with Mr. J.
We just finished that interview with Mr. J. And what a fun interview.
Yes, it was.
A lot of fun.
Great personality.
A great personality. And, it's funny to say,
insight.
Gee, talking about betrayal trauma was fun. That's an odd juxtaposition.
He made it fun.
He made it fun, yeah. And, of course, betrayal trauma is anything but fun.
No, it's
but
not.
He works with couples, as indeed I do, and we had a lot of stuff to talk about.
Very interesting insights, and I liked what he had to say about it. So we hope you will too.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we do that, let's put in some plugs for the books that we wrote.
Well, speaking of betrayal,
funny you should mention.
We have Bruce's Betrayal and Forgiveness: How to Navigate the Turmoil and Learn to Trust Again. And
I've been getting feedback from folks that is a book that, among other things, simply helps them feel better. Mm-hmm. It's one of the reasons I wrote it. It's like, well, I hope you, in reading this book, at least I hope you will feel better. You'll feel some sense of hope. You'll feel some sense that there's a direction you can go in recovering from betrayal. Right. And so if you have yourself dealt with betrayal, which, you know what, if you are... If you're watching us or hearing us, which is the only way that this message is getting to you, you probably have experienced it somewhere in your life. You probably lived long enough that that's happened. And there are plenty of folks who have benefited from that book whose the betrayal they're talking about happened, 30 years ago. Mm-hmm. And that's something that you can absolutely benefit from, or if it's much more recent, or if you're helping someone, so a family member, or if you're a therapist and you're helping out couples, you will benefit from this book. So I hope you will.
Or even if you were the one doing the betraying.
There's a whole chapter in there for you if you're the one doing the betraying as well. Mm-hmm. So what else have we got?
Well, we have... It's not about communication. Why everything you know about couples therapy is wrong, while we're sitting here talking about couples therapy.
Yes, indeed. And let me say something about that book, if I may.
Okay.
We are recording this right before the presidential election. Now, when you folks are seeing or hearing this, might well be after. But it is a time of high anxiety in our country. It is a time where the polarization seems like more extreme than I remember it, let's say, from a long time ago. And a lot of what I talk about in that book, I have 2 chapters in that book. It's not about communication. Mm-hmm. 2 chapters on the difference between ideas and ideologies. And I think it is very relevant. And I think it's relevant regardless of who ends up winning this election. It is a relevant topic because ideology is the problem.
Yeah, I was just listening to a podcast about that the other day, actually. I think it was one of Barry Weiss's, Free Press.
Oh, yeah.
And I forgot who she was even talking to. I listened to so many podcasts. And one of her guests was talking about the fact that we're dealing with so much ideology these days.
Yeah.
And that the presidential debates, they're not really debates because you're not hearing ideas, you're hearing sound bites.
Yeah, yeah.
And because of that, you're slipping into all these different ideologies, and you're not getting what people want to hear. Yeah, and that's the thing about, and I want to expand on that a little because I think it's important. The thing about ideologies, as I'm defining the term, when you slip into ideology, you are no longer open to ideas. Right.
And the ideas are often interesting, and of course, if somebody is giving you ideas that are challenging to your own ideas, that can invite some anxiety and invite some inner conflict, or even argument.
Sure.
That's all productive if you're still in the domain of ideas. Wow, I'm not sure I like what you're saying, but let's engage around that. It's interesting because I'm coming from before I drop into ideologies, I'm coming from a place that says, you know what, you're probably not crazy, you're probably not stupid, nor am I. If you think something that I think is so different, I'll bet there's some basis for it that I don't quite understand. Let's see if we can understand each other better. Mm-hmm. That's what ideas do. Ideology, as soon as the ideology wall drops, then all of a sudden you can't hear anything. And those, when you talk about debates being the sort of thing that they're just sound bites, the sound bites are designed to be signals of which side you're on. Exactly. And as soon as somebody drops something that implies, you're on the other side of the ideology wall, I can't hear you anymore. Mm-hmm. And then it's no longer actually an exchange of ideas. In fact, it's worse. And my thesis in the book is that when ideas turn into ideologies, they become a caricature of the original ideas. All of these ideas that so many people have about, you know what, compassion is a good thing for other people. And when it turns into ideology, in the name of compassion, people are killing each other. Yeah. In the name of, well, you're doing compassion wrong, so we're going to hate you. You know, that's what happens with ideology. So yeah, that's that book. I've got one other book.
Yes, you do.
Yeah.
Reigniting the Spark: Why Stable Relationships Lose Intimacy and How to Get It Back.
Yes, and that's the book, as you like to point out, the book that started this podcast. And the 7 words of this podcast: be kind, don't panic, and have faith. And Judy is, for those of you who are not watching, Judy is holding up one of our beautiful couples therapy and 7-word mugs that have the inspiring logo on one side, and the inspiring message on the other: be kind, don't panic, and have faith. And that whole idea is what I write about in that book, Reigniting the Spark. It was really organized around those 7 words.
Right.
So I hope you'll get a hold of that. But there's another book that...
Right, not necessarily aimed at couples to talk about their relationship in like couple therapist lingo.
I would claim that this book you're about to talk about definitely can have positive effects on a couple's relationship.
Definitely have positive effects on couples' relationships. And that would be The Blue Tent: Erotic Tales from the Bible by Laria Zilber.
Laria Zilber, my not-so-secret crush, because it's you. Yes. And Laria, I have to say, and I've never been able to get you and Laria in the room at the same time, what can I tell you? But Laria writes beautifully.
Yes, she does.
And very, it's really sexy.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, so that's available paperback, Kindle, and audiobook. I do the narration.
Yes, you do. And that's, boy, worth it just to hear your voice. So we hope you'll get a hold of all of those things. So let's get on with our interview.
Let's do that.
And we'll see you on the other side.
Our guest today is Mr. J. Mr. J is a betrayal trauma practitioner and intrapersonal relationship coach. He holds a master's degree in education, is a certified special education teacher, ministry credentialed, and an inspirational public speaker. He is the author of a children's book, I Am Loved Right Where I Am, and a betrayal trauma healing journal, From Tears to Transformation. He is a proud veteran of the United States military and even more proud adoptive parent. Mr. J began his career in teaching as a substitute kindergarten teacher. After a decade of teaching and another decade as a full-time stay-at-home dad, Mr. J entered the mental health field and now works as a betrayal trauma practitioner. During his downtime, Mr. J enjoys roller skating, listening to music, officiating at weddings, singing at local charities and events, public speaking, and watching an occasional guilty pleasure crime show. Jay, welcome to Couples Therapy in 7 Words.
Thank you, both of you. I appreciate this opportunity.
Well, we're delighted to have you. So we always like to start off by asking our guests, how did you get into the work you do? Tell us something about your own journey.
You know, I always say I never got into this field. This field found me. Very quickly, I can give you the long story, but I'm going to give you the extreme short abbreviated version. A couple of years ago, I lost my father abruptly. And when I mean abruptly, I was talking to him on the phone. One day we were telling jokes, laughing, and literally 4 days later, I was lowering him into the ground.
Oh, my.
And about 3 days after that, I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning and I smelled smoke. Now I have 2 young kids. And so I immediately jumped out of my bed and I was going around my house trying to find the origin of this smoke. And I went into my kitchen and the living room and I'm going downstairs, I'm going upstairs. And I even opened up my door thinking that there's one of my neighbors, have the fireplace on. I could not find the origin of this smoke. And I was like, that's interesting. There was no smoke at all anywhere, but I smelled it. So I was like, okay, I'm not sure, whatever. So I went to go lay back to bed. The second my head hit the pillow, I was brought back to when I was 6 years old, standing next to my mother, who was screaming bloody murder because our house burnt down to the ground.
Oh, my. Wow.
And so my father's death brought up a lot of unhealed childhood trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And when I started looking into, okay, how do I address this? How do I deal with this? One thing led me to another. And next thing you know, I was like, this is something very interesting. I got involved with a few organizations. I started volunteering, then I started helping. Then I went through uh, a betrayal trauma practitioner program where I got
Mm.
certified, and the rest is history.
Uh, I'm sort of curious. I mean, why particularly betrayal trauma? And it's interesting, and our viewers and listeners will know, I just recently released a book called Betrayal and Forgiveness. So, I'm writing all about that,
Okay.
largely because I see it so often when I work with couples, which is who I work with. And we all have our path into it. But I'm sort of curious, what led you into specifically working on betrayal trauma?
I think it started with, I had a interesting childhood. Let's just say that.
Mm.
I, quit school in sixth grade. I had to, raise my sister.
Mm.
Was homeless as an early teen. Got my first apartment on my own when I was 14.
Wow.
I lied to two of my employers. One of them, I said I had to go to school at night. The other one, I went to school in the morning. That way I could work at night in the morning. And the other ones thought I was in school.
Yeah.
And all my life, I've just had betrayal after betrayal after betrayal. And then as you get to an adult and you don't heal those betrayals, you attract what's familiar. And what's
Mm.
familiar is not always what's healthy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've had, some betrayals in my adult life too. And it just seemed like that was the sweet spot with my forte. And I think, what's interesting is, I'm credentialed. I think I'm very well credentialed. But to be honest with you, um, what people want to know when you're working with them is, have you been in my hell, and how the can you walk me out of this hell?
Yeah.
And I always say, I have degrees and I can tell you all my degrees, but I think the most fitting degree for the profession I have is I have a PhD from the School of Hard Knocks. So I
Hmm.
can
Yeah.
relate a lot to people, because listen, one of the examples I use sometimes is, if you're a woman and you have a miscarriage and you're talking to somebody who didn't, you can get all the yeahs and the head nods and the sympathy, but it's a different conversation if you have a conversation with another woman who had a miscarriage. The energy is completely different in that
Hmm.
conversation. So here I am.
Indeed. So, what do you mean by betrayal trauma? How do you understand that concept?
So betrayal trauma, based in layman's terms, it's an attachment break from a primary attachment. It's trust that's broken from a primary attachment. That could be from your child, that could be from your boss, it could be from your creator. It could actually be from yourself. I work
Mm.
with people who are like, Mr. J, I drank my shakes and I did my exercises and I had good diet, and I still was diagnosed with breast cancer. I felt like my body betrayed me.
Mm.
Certainly a spousal betrayal. And betrayal trauma is life altering helplessness, hopelessness at the hands of somebody that you trusted. I often say very quickly, and I hope I don't waste your time.
No, not at all.
So
We got
imagine,
plenty of
That's
time.
that's why you're
awesome.
here, actually, to enhance
And
our time.
listen, I can talk, so please interrupt me, honestly.
Well, we're
Okay,
used to that too. So,
good.
Judy's
Uh,
especially used to that because of me. So that's
I love it.
yeah.
So imagine there's a bridge a mile above earth, a mile above ground. There's a bridge. It's very thin and it's about a mile long. Okay. And you're at the beginning of this bridge, and under this bridge is volcanoes and fire, and you're on this bridge, and let's just say you're holding the two things that you hold most dear. Let's just say they're your children. So you're holding your children in each of your arms, and you're on this bridge, and the smoke coming up and the smog, and the fog is so thick you can hardly see in front of you, but you got to get yourself and your kids to the other side of this bridge safe.
Mm.
And the only person that's in front of you guiding is the person that you loved and trusted the most in life. And so they're guiding you, and there's times you can't even see in front of you, so you have to like put your hands on their shoulder just to, okay, am I going the correct way, whatever. And you got your kids, and all of the sudden, out of nowhere, the bridge collapses. Your
Mm.
mind is hijacked. You're falling. You got your kids in your hand. You have no idea what's going on. You are scared. You're looking around for things to grab onto. You're confused. You don't know what's going on. You look up and you see the person you loved and trusted the most in life has a hammer in their hands. They're the ones that collapsed the bridge. Now you're like, what is anyway? So you fall, you don't die, and that's where I come in. But that's betrayal trauma.
That's a great metaphor.
Wow.
Yeah, I was thinking as you were describing that there's a famous. It was turned into a song in the Jewish world, which is where we come from Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav. Kol ha'olam kulo gesher tzar. The whole world is a very narrow bridge. The main thing is not to fear. Actually, what Nachman said is the main thing is not to make yourself afraid. But that phenomenon that here you are trusting someone to get you across that bridge and come to discover not merely did they not get you across the bridge, but they actually destroyed it. Boy, that's a wonderful metaphor for
Yeah.
how it
How
feels
do
when
you come
someone's
back from
betrayed.
that?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah.
You also said something else that I don't want to let get by because it fits so nicely. It's of course, when you've written a book, all of a sudden I keep seeing all the ideas that I've written in my book and other people's stuff, and I'm saying, oh, good. Yeah, that it feels sort of validating. It's like, oh, good, somebody else thought about that too. You mentioned something about betrayal. One of the possibilities for betrayal is to be betrayed by your creator. And I love that notion because when I talk about forgiveness, which is, and forgiveness, I don't mean necessarily restoring the relationship, but I mean getting past the shock. That's the inside job aspect of forgiveness. I talk about 3 steps, and the third step is to forgive God because it's about that sense that how could we live in a world where, in effect, God lets that happen? And to be able to appreciate, okay, the world is the way it is for very good reasons, most of which we can't understand. And we're simply going to have to work with it rather than insist that it not be what it is. That's what forgiving God is. And, the idea that, yeah, somebody can do all the right stuff and still get cancer. Well, we're going to have to accept that that seems to be part of the biology of life and work with it. And when you can do that, there's an amazing growth possible. But it's interesting that, yeah, the notion of being betrayed extends to when some awful thing happens and there's no human being to blame.
Yeah, yeah. And you touched upon reframing, which I think is very, very important. And so much of this, I think, is reframing because listen, one of the things about betrayal trauma is that it wakes up the sleeping giants within. So I tell people all the time, and listen, this isn't studied or surveyed, this is just my own personal opinion, so take it as you will. But I believe when somebody is going through betrayal trauma, about 40% of them, in my opinion, 40% of them is going through the recent current trauma that they're experiencing. 60% of them is dealing with the unhealed trauma they never dealt with when they were younger, which is why so many times we focus on the current trauma. We're not getting to the foundation of what that trauma resurrected. I don't know if you remember, who was it? George Bush, after the trade centers came down, he said, they woke up a sleeping giant. America woke up that, whatever. With betrayal trauma, you wake up those sleeping giant of all of the unhealed betrayal. Before I forget, I just want to say, because we were talking before about see, okay, we all struggle with something. I have ADHD, and this is why if I don't stay on point, I will derail and derail and derail. I was talking about reframing before. I want to finish that. We were talking about reframing before. I always try and encourage those I'm working with instead of, because obviously, and I understand it, we're all human. It's why me, why me, why me. And I try to tell people, can you go from why me to what now? Because the why me is just going to keep you marinating in the little violin.
Right.
But real quick, one of the things I wanted to say, the difference between betrayal trauma and trauma, there's a couple differences. One of them is it's a secret society. If we go through trauma, let's just say one of your parent passes away, okay? That is traumatic. That could be traumatic. That's trauma, but it's not a secret society. We can call our boss and get 5 days of bereavement days, and we can get flowers from our coworkers and cards and maybe a meal train. We can't do that when we discover that our life was a big secret or there were so many lies or whatever. We can't call our boss and say, hey, listen, I was heartbroken time off. I mean, there's no such thing. And if you do call your boss and say, I need time off, then you have to feel embarrassed or shame that you're telling why. Because obviously people go through a lot of shame and guilt owning what they're partner did, with
Yeah.
which, whatever. And the other reason why betrayal trauma is different from other traumas is because trauma, and I don't want to say trauma in general because that's minimizing, but trauma affects the here and now and the future. Betrayal trauma affects the here and now, the future, but also the past. Because you can't look at the photo albums the way you used to.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can't visit the places in the restaurants. So betrayal trauma is different from trauma in a few different ways, but that's one of the big ones, is that it affects both the
Yeah.
past and the future.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I've noted that with folks as they heal. It's been fascinating because and this is true, I think trauma in general and betrayal trauma in particular, as people heal from betrayal trauma, often one of the signs of their healing is they can look at the past with more nuance. They can look and say, well, I guess that whole marriage, yeah, it ended badly, but it's not like it was all totally worthless or had no meaning. It's that, well, it ended badly. When they're in the throes of the betrayal trauma, they can't see that. It's like, oh, it all was meaningless. And as they're able to develop that sense of nuance, it's like, oh, actually, there were some good times there were some good times with that abusive parent. Yes, they were abusive. It was horrible, but actually, if I'm not panicked about it, I can realize, well, there were also some good times. Isn't that interesting? That's where you can get to when you heal. But of course, that takes work.
Yeah, that's on the other end of the spectrum, 100%.
Yes.
Yeah. One of the hardest things when I'm working with people is working through them. There were lies. It wasn't all a lie.
Yes. Yes. Indeed.
So yeah, I get that. Absolutely. It's a fascinating field with many developments, continuous developments. And it's a field that is so necessary, so necessary.
And one of the things that we saw in your readings and talks, you've talked about betrayal blindness. So what is that, and how does it affect people in relationships?
So if you don't mind, I'm going to quickly give you a little story that we all know.
Please do.
Red Riding Hood. Let's just say she had COVID lockdowns and she couldn't go see her grandmother for a year and a half. Well, the lockdowns were lifted. Now she can go see her grandmother. Man, all she has is blind. She wants to go see her grandma. So she bakes oatmeal cookies and banana breads, and she trudges through that very scary, precarious forest. And she just wants to see her grandmother. I don't care about nothing. I want to see my grandmother. She knocks on her grandmother's door, and something inside her says something's off. But she ignores it because she wants to see her grandmother. She opens the door. Grandma doesn't respond. Something really feels off. But she wants to see her grandmother so bad, she ignores it. She walks in. She even says in the story, Grandma, why do you have beady eyes and a long nose and sharp teeth? She knows something's off. But what? She doesn't leave. She wants to believe it's her grandmother, and it's at her detriment. She gets eaten. That's betrayal blindness. We know something.
Well, I've been there.
Obvious to other people. Wait, what did you say? I'm sorry.
I said I've been there.
Yeah, it's obvious to other people.
Yeah.
But really, honestly, it's a part of our nervous system, and probably our logic too, is I don't want to accept this as truth because the reality that it's going to bring, I can't deal with it right now. So let me live in Pretendville.
Yeah.
But then what happens, and I'm sorry to interrupt you and dominate the conversation, but then what happens is not only when the bomb goes off in your life and you realize the lies and the secrets, not only are you getting over the betrayal of the person who hurt you, but you're also trying to work through and navigate the betrayal you gave yourself for repressing and
right, because you feel like an idiot. Why didn't I see this? Why didn't I own up to it? Am I in this whole deception?
100%. And then, it says in the Bible, and I don't want to use the Bible a lot, but it says in the Bible, just
that's okay. We're Bible people.
Okay, yeah. Well, only because if people are listening and they're not, I don't want to, but it says in the Bible, love covers a multitude of sins. And I think in a lot of relationships and marriages, what happens is that, somebody hurts us, and then, I'm going to cover that with a blanket of love. Somebody frustrates that. I'm going to cover that with a blanket of love. Somebody mini betrays us, which whatever. I'm going to cover that with the blanket of love. Then all of a sudden that bomb goes off in your marriage. All of those blankets come up, and now you're, oh my God,
why? It's awfully hot under all those blankets.
Yeah. And then and now you're dealing with I'm such an idiot on top of the betrayal you're going through.
Yeah, that's when I talk about 3 steps to forgiveness, I mentioned step 3 being forgive God, but step 1 is forgive yourself. And it is all about those very things. And I love to point out to people, and I think it's something I say to almost every couple I meet about 20 minutes in, usually. Usually I will say, well, now that we're all buddies because I've known you for 20 minutes, I can tell something about each of you. And I only say this if it's true, but it's almost always true, which is I can tell neither one of you is batshit crazy, which is to say, the denial, for example, that sort of thing, it's not a crazy thing to do. It isn't indicative of any sort of mental illness or failure of, or stupidity or anything like that. It's a natural self-protection mechanism, and it works as long as it works, and then often it doesn't. But it's not a crazy thing. And forgiving yourself is about recognizing that. It's about recognizing, okay, under the circumstances, knowing what I knew and not knowing what I didn't know, and influenced by those very forces, it's like, oh my God, the thought of having to break up is so horrible. I don't want to think it. Under all of those circumstances, I was doing the best I could. And that's what it feels like, I think, to forgive yourself. But that's usually, in my experience, that's the hardest step. Because if somebody can get there, if they can really look at themselves and say, oh, I actually was doing the best I could, even though I look back on it now, it's like, well, gee, if I'd known, I would have acted differently. Well, you can extend that to the person who hurt you. You can say, well, I wish they hadn't done that. It was wrong. It was morally wrong, but I guess given all the forces, that's what they came up with. I guess they were doing the best they could at that moment too. Not morally the best they could, but
Yeah.
were who they were. I'm going to have to work with that.
So
Yeah.
how do you help people get past that betrayal?
Yeah.
Ooh, well, okay. I'm gonna answer that question in 1 second, but
Okay.
I just want to say something. Dr. Bruce, what you just said is fascinating on so many levels because, first of all, I think first of all, what's the second component? So there's yourself and God was 1 and 3.
And
What's the
and
second?
for step one, forgive yourself. Step two is forgive the person who hurt you. So that it's extend that forgiveness to the person who hurt you.
Okay. So now how do you deal with people? Because one of the things that when I'm working with people, I say you first have to define what forgiveness is for you. Because if you ask 100
Absolutely.
different people what forgiveness is, they're
Yes.
going to give you, and a lot of people have no idea what forgiveness. A lot of times people will say, okay, forgiveness means what you did is okay. And we're going to,
Right.
go hold hands and skip into the meadow, into the sunset, which I often say, and I don't want to derail. And Judy, I do want to answer your question, but here my ADHD is going. So let me try to put this in some coherent words. One of the things that I think a lot of people don't understand with forgiveness is that I often say, listen, forget about the word for again, this is me. You might not subscribe to this theory. That's fine. One of the things I try and tell people is I say, forget the word forgiveness, replace it with self-love. Because forgiveness has nothing to do with the other person. So
Well, that is almost a quote from my book.
oh, delicious.
In other words, I devote several chapters actually to what is forgiveness and what isn't forgiveness. And indeed, the usual, exactly as you're saying, often, I think more often, when people say I forgive someone, they mean I'm willing to restore the relationship. Yeah, they don't even have to say it wasn't a big deal, but they can say, we all make mistakes. I can get past it. Let's move on. And that's not what I mean by forgiveness. I mean much closer to what you're talking about, which is to say, no, forgiveness means I don't have to panic anymore about it. I don't have to be preoccupied. I can forgive someone I don't trust at all. I can forgive somebody who doesn't deserve any sort of forgiveness. No remorse, no learning, no nothing. I can still forgive them. I probably won't want to trust them, but I can
Yeah.
still forgive them. So
Yeah.
indeed, it's an inside job when I
Yeah.
talk forgiveness.
And keeping in mind that forgiveness, reconciliation, and rebuilding is 3 different worlds.
Right.
A lot
Yeah,
of people think,
absolutely.
oh, I'm going to forgive. That means, let's go and, oh, you know what? I'm so sorry. The other thing you said too, Dr. Bruce, I wanted to say is you're talking about you're not crazy, you're not bat crap crazy. It's interesting because you're so right, because that's one of the questions that I get constantly is, am I going crazy? And, well, first of all, we're all a little crazy, but whatever. But that said,
Yeah.
no, even like with what's that called? I call it hyper bonding. That's not the term. It's hysterical bonding. When people come together and have their sexual like rabbits after betrayal, and then what happens is after that hysterical bonding moment passes, then people look at themselves and say, I feel so gross and dirty and filthy and disgusting. Why did it's normal? You're not crazy. Absolutely. Okay, now, so Judy, to answer your question, if you don't mind, where on the spectrum are you talking about as far as helping people? Because if I get a call from somebody who's hugging the toilet bear style, throwing up because they just found the lipstick in their glove compartment. I'm going to do something different from somebody who, 30 years ago, my spouse did this, and I'm just now going through hot flashes with a midlife crisis, and I'm dealing with some unhealed things. So where on the spectrum would you like me to go?
I pick one.
Okay. One of the things that I think, I'll just say this, I'll go in the middle somewhere. One of the things that I really try to encourage people to do is to write down a needs assessment when you're in prefrontal cortex. So basically, when you're in logical mind, because as you know, when you're betrayed, your mind is hijacked. So when your brain is thinking logically, even if it's that 20 minutes a day, you need to write down a needs assessment. Because listen, just like everybody's coping mechanisms are different, everybody's support systems are different, our needs are different. Write down your needs and 3 support systems. So for instance, 3 restaurants that all I have to do is pick up the phone or order on my app, and they'll deliver food within a half an hour. Because there's a lot of single mothers out there who are in the fetal position in bed, and they can't get up and cook, but they still got to feed their kids. So when you're not thinking, and the last thing you want to do is start frying a steak or macaroni and cheese, you know what? Do Domino's in a half an hour. Name 3 people you can call in the middle of the night and just pray with you. You don't have to get into a long conversation. They'll pick up the phone and say, I hear you, and let's start praying. Name 3 comedies or movies that are funny, whatever, that are not going to make you laugh, because you're not going to laugh when you're in certain modes. But just like when you take Excedrin migraine, it's not going to get rid of the migraine. It's going to take the edge off. So what are 3 things that you can just watch or listen to that's going to take the edge off? What are 3 people that you can call on if you want to go out to your car and scream and punch your steering wheel? They'll come and watch your kids. So that's one of the things that I do is, write down a needs assessment, 3 things, because when the amygdala starts kicking off and you're not logical and you can't think, then you want to go to this list and it's all in writing. Oh, this is what I need. Let me call this person, because you can't think of that when you're hijacked. I can go on and on and on, but I won't talk for 4 hours.
Yeah, that sense of where you're at in the process. It's an interesting question. I was just thinking about that. In 30 years of practice, I've only had one session where the bomb was dropped in the session. Almost always, I'll get the call a week or 2 or 3 later. That happens a lot. It's like, well, because one of the first questions I tend to ask people is, why are you doing this now? Was there something that precipitated this? That's when they will often say, well, yeah, I just found out, 2 weeks ago that he or she was having an affair. But it's only happened once because if they don't say that, I then I'll then sort of, in checking off a few things that I'll ask about before we get into some other stuff, I'll say, well, just to rule this out, you haven't mentioned, sometimes when I ask that question about why now, people say, well, there's been some infidelity, any infidelity happening. And I've only had one occasion where one person immediately said, no, there's no infidelity. And the other person said, well, actually, been meaning to tell you, boom. And the other thing that's happened, this has happened maybe 3 or 4 times throughout my career. I've gotten calls from people setting up an appointment who have said, should I tell her or him before the appointment or during the appointment? And I always will say, well, it's usually a more productive appointment if they already know. In other words, if they're past the initial shock, but it only happened once where they didn't ask me that question, and then
Wow,
they dropped the bomb in. So indeed, it is a very different story when you're in initial shock than when you've had a little bit of time to process. And then you could do the sort of things you're describing. But in that initial shock, you can't even do that. It's like,
and listen, sometimes I'll be honest, I'm a little shocked, even though I've been in this field doing this for a while, because I was working with a couple one time, and the wife was convinced her husband was whatever, and he kept saying, let me be very clear with you. There's not another woman. There's never been another woman. I give you my word, whatever. And he was absolutely right. But it came out there was another man.
Another man, yes. We wrote a song about that.
Sometimes you're like, oh, okay.
Yep. Yeah, and so he wasn't lying exactly.
But there was infidelity.
There was infidelity. Well, she didn't ask
Okay,
that.
so they've written down the needs assessment and gotten past that stage. Then what happens?
Well, it all depends too. Are they where are they on the forgiveness spectrum?
Mm-hmm.
Are they trying to reconcile? If yes, where on the reconcile spectrum are they? Are they trying to rebuild? Because reconcile, I mean, everybody, there's different definitions of reconciliation.
Hmm.
In my opinion, reconciliation just could mean we're cohabitating. We're back together. We were
Yeah.
apart. Now we're back to, that doesn't necessarily mean rebuilding.
Yeah.
Or and if you're rebuilding, where are you? So you really have to get in there and do some emotional and spiritual surgery on where somebody is. But one of the things that I say all the time is, you know, to the person who was betrayed, this certainly wasn't about you, but I understand it certainly affected you. You have now been given a full-time job that you never applied for. And I understand
Hmm.
you're frustrated and you're angry, but you have a lot of work to do. You cannot sit back and say, okay, this person needs therapy. Oh, no,
Yeah.
no, no. You both have a lot of work to do. So you need to be doing your individual work. You need to be doing your individual work. We talk about triggers. One of the things that I tell people about triggers, which, you know, emotional flashbacks or triggers, is triggers has three components. Again, this is all my own theory.
Mm.
Triggers have three components. The first component is the memory or the thought. Okay. And the third component is what our nervous system filters out and how it responds. We don't really have control over the first component or the third component.
Mm.
The second component, however, I feel like we have a lot of control over. The second component is what information do you have and what information are you telling yourself so you can give your nervous system to put through your filters.
Yeah.
So, for
Yeah.
instance, the betrayer has a basket. Okay. The betrayer has a basket, and the person who betrayed needs to fill that basket. Fill that basket by complete honesty, complete transparency, encouragement, support, get into some coaching or counseling, do your workbooks, listen to podcasts, share what you're learning. You don't have to share everything you talk about in therapy. That's, you know, your business. Um, uh, Assure them, give them safety, fill their basket up. Because when they get that first component of a trigger, they need to go to their basket and say, okay, yeah. So, perfect example. Let's just say your spouse cheated on you with a teacher. Okay. Now you're driving down the highway in the fall and you're big billboard, back to school sale. And you get that tightening in your gut. It's like, oh,
Hmm.
school, that teacher, whatever. Okay. You need to go back to your basket. You know what? Yes, my spouse did have an affair with a teacher, but you know what? He or she give me a full disclosure. He or she is now transparent. He or she put a thing on their phone where I know where they are at all times. He or she, when they go away for business, they take a picture of where they are and they send it to me. He or she asks me every morning, "What can I do to make you feel safe?" Or did you have any triggers you want to share with me today? And so when you give yourself that information, then what your nervous system does with that makes a whole lot of difference.
Yeah.
Rather than they go to an empty basket and they're like, "Now I just had a full back flashback, and now there's a frying pan upside your head because
Mm.
you're not making me feel safe."
Yeah. Yeah. That, I mean, that idea is, it's an interesting way of thinking about it in terms of, those three different aspects. And I used to do a lot of work with folks. I'm trained in EMDR, if you're familiar with that one.
Of course.
And, yeah. And it's really effective in actually facilitating even being able to go to the basket, because to be able to go to the basket, you have to not have your brain hijacked already. And so that phenomenon of doing the work so that you can think about the memory without having your panic system triggered, that's where the therapies like EMDR are often very effective, because they give
Mm-hmm.
your brain some training. It's like, yes, this was an awful event. It was even dangerous to you emotionally and sometimes physically, depending on the trauma. But if you're able to recognize that the memory of the event isn't dangerous, then you have a little bit of psychic space. Then you have some space where I like that image. You can go to that basket. You can say, okay, wait a minute, it isn't all teachers, and besides, we've all grown through this. There's been some growth here. We can look at this differently. I don't have to be so afraid. But you can only do that if you're not instantly in panic, which is what happens before you're able to train your brain to say that the memory of this is not dangerous. The event was bad, but the memory of it doesn't have to be bad.
Yeah.
That is often the work that someone has to do to recover from any kind of trauma, I think.
Without question. I will say, because this field is so interesting and it's complex and all this other stuff, one of the things you just made me think of this while you were talking, is I always tell people when it comes to forgiveness, you have to forgive the fact, and then you have to forgive the impact. So,
Mm.
for example, if I come into your house right now and I take $1,000 out of your dresser drawer, now you can't pay rent this month or mortgage, whatever. and you keep saying, hey, Mr. J, you took $1,000, can you pay me back? And I keep giving you excuses or ignoring your phone calls, whatever. Then you get to a point, 2 months down the line, you know what? You don't owe me that money. I'm going to absolve you of that $1,000. I can't trust you in my home anymore, but I don't want to be emotionally tied to you anymore.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I forgive you. You forgave me for the fact. But 3 months down the line, because you couldn't pay that rent, and now you're behind in your phone bill and your cable bill and your car bill, now you're getting kicked out of your house. Now you're pissed. And then you're thinking, well, geez, did I forgive or not forgive? Because I'm pissed. Now you got to start forgiving the impact.
Mm-hmm.
And what's difficult about this is that when you're talking to somebody who was given an STD, it's
Mm-hmm.
very difficult to forgive the impact when the impact is ongoing.
Yeah, the gift that keeps on giving. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
100%.
Yeah. Yeah, that's that's quite something.
Yes, it is.
So what else should we be asking you about?
Oh, I like boating and fishing. No, I'm just kidding. One of the things I just want to say is a couple things for the listeners. Number one, I always say this, and again, this is just me, myself, and I don't know, don't, if anybody's listening, don't hold Dr. Bruce to this stuff. This is just my own things. I always say this: you are 100% responsible for your own issues. You are 100% responsible for your own issues. You are 100% responsible for how you show up in the relationship. You are 0% responsible for anybody's choices and decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Because one of the things that vexes people horrifically is, why wasn't I good enough? What could I have done better? What would have? Then if you have a partner who 9 times out of 10, they do this unknowing how destructive it is. I wouldn't have done this if you would have done that.
Mm-hmm.
Which, oh my God, the damage that does is ridiculous.
Yeah.
But so we are 100% responsible for our own issues, 100% responsible for how we show up in the relationship, but we have zero. I say all the time, listen, if there's a gun right now on your desk, if there's a gun right now on your desk, it's not hurting anyone. It's just a gun on your desk. If I were to come load that gun, and I'm talking about load it with bullets, it doesn't hurt anyone. It's sitting on your desk. It's only until somebody chooses to pick up that gun, aim, pull the trigger, and fire, somebody gets hurt.
Yeah.
So I don't care if somebody, not to say that this should ever be allowed, don't get me wrong, but I don't care if somebody physically, verbally, mentally, emotionally, financially hurts you, abuses you, whatever. You still made the decision to go outside of your marriage. So you need to be responsible. I don't want to hear, well, they did this and they did that. You had many others. Why did you choose the worst one?
Yeah, it's fascinating, that distinction between moral culpability and context. And it turns out, I think, they're both really important. It is very rare in my experience when I'm working with couples. Of course, what are they doing in couples therapy? It's almost always clear that the person who did the cheating, when there was cheating, let's say, they're always very clear that it was wrong. I don't think I've had numbers of cases actually where they don't agree whether it was cheating or not. That's an interesting one. It's like, is this cheating? Is looking at porn cheating? Is masturbating when you're in a relationship cheating? People have varying ideas of that. That's a whole different thing. But where it's clear that they cheated, it's like, no, somebody had sex with somebody outside their marriage and they had their deal was monogamy and they broke it. They're usually very clear. Yes, what I did was wrong. That wasn't my partner's fault that I did that. Having said all that, you also have to examine the context, because I've had so many people sitting there saying, I never would have thought in a million years I'd have cheated on my wife, husband, whatever. And yet I did. And again, not absolving them of moral responsibility, not blaming the person they cheated on, but saying, well, what was going on in your relationship? And when they can get there, that's where it gets interesting. And I've worked with lots of couples, it's very inspiring. I find this, when they get to that point of being able to say, wow, something needed to happen. I wish it had, never had anybody, I say this a lot, Judy's heard this a million times. I've never had anybody say, hey, thanks for cheating. Never had that. I've had lots of people say words to the effect of, you know what? Apparently we needed a crisis. Bummer that you did what you did, but I kind of see where it came from, and look how much better off we are now. I appreciate that. It's that my classic story on that one is the woman who turned to her husband in our last session because they were leaving town. This is before telehealth. This is pre-COVID. And they knew they were leaving town, and they had done this amazing work, and it healed from his infidelity amazingly. It was about a year and a half work. And she said to him, "Hey, thanks for taking one for the team." And he said, "What do you mean by that?" And she said, "Well, you were the one who did the thing you had to feel guilty." Because it was, he knew it was wrong. She knew it was wrong. But look how much better off we are now. Our relationship is better. She was talking about how much better her relationships were with her coworkers for having gone through this. And it was all about the growth that crisis precipitated. So, the context is different from moral responsibility. And to be able to hold both of those ideas, it's difficult. That is
Yeah.
hard for people.
Yeah. I one of these days I want to write a book called the Lessons of the Lessons, because there are silver linings to, but you're right. If sometimes if you see somebody who had a heart attack 2 years after their heart attack, they eat healthy, their
Yeah.
lifestyles phenomenal, whatever, and they needed that earthquake, whatever. Now obviously we never want to tell anybody that in the beginning, because I'm on social, like I upload TikTok videos, and it's very interesting because one of the things that I tell people all the time is, listen, from the time of discovery until the time you feel like you can lift your nose above water and say, okay, maybe I can do this, there's probably about 500 different pairs of glasses you have to put on. The day of D-Day, you can't see, all you see is destruction and devastation all around you. After a while, and you're doing the work and you're doing the work and you're doing the work, and then all of a sudden you put on glasses number 350. Okay, now maybe you'll see a tree in the distance away from all that rubbish and destruction, whatever. And then glasses number 400, you start maybe applying some compassion or whatever. So you just can't see what you can't see. But anyways, so sometimes I upload a video on social media, and I'm referencing somebody that's on the other side of the healing journey, where they are like, here's the silver linings. And man, people that are in that first acute 3 months of betrayal, they're like, how dare you say this is, A, B, and C and whatever. I'm like, well, you're just not wearing those glasses yet.
Yeah.
What can I say?
Yeah, not ready to see that one.
That's when I've posted stuff about, we did a podcast on that, that how can you say that no good cheating jerk is doing the best they could? Well, it's nuanced, isn't it? It's like
Turns out they were.
Turns out they were, in a sense. They weren't in a moral sense. Of course they could do better. We'd all do better. Well, it's the same thing about forgiving yourself. Oh, I was so stupid. How could I not see that? Well, in the sense of hindsight, sure. The signs were there. My friends were warning me, in the sense of actually the person I was at the time, I was just doing the best I could. That's what I came up with. I'm a valid person,
Maybe you were just a rotten, deceptive individual who did
Yes.
those things and really had no moral compunction. You
Well,
can
yeah.
also look at it that way.
Oh, absolutely. And you're talking about, yes, the perp. In that case,
not
I was
you.
talking about the victim. Yeah. No, I was thinking from the victim's stance, but from the perp stance, yes. And indeed, you might, if you're the one who was married to the perp, you might well be thinking, okay, well, I see who I've got here. Somebody I simply can't trust. Bummer. Let's figure out how to move on. But in that sense, he was doing the best he could. That's kind of who he is. It's what's the story they talk about, I'm getting all mixed up. What somebody some alligator was going to give somebody a ride, give the animal.
Like the
Oh, yeah.
Or the fox giving somebody a ride across the stream, and it turns out or it's a wolf or whatever it is.
Yeah, alligator.
I'm massacring that story,
What did you
What
expect?
do you
I heard
expect?
it was
I'm
a
a wolf.
snake and a rat. So
A snake and a
whatever,
rat. There you go.
yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yes, it's what do you expect?
Yeah. One of the things that one of my favorite sayings in life is from Maya Angelou. I did then what I knew. Now I know better, and I'll do better.
Yes.
And I tell people all the time, well, first of all, I make it very clear. Guilt has to accompany intent. So you cannot feel guilt unless you have intent. That's number one. Number two, you cannot hold yourself accountable for believing in love. So much of us wants to believe in love. So no, you're not an idiot. You're not stupid. You believed in love.
Right.
And we all, that's since the dawn of day. We all have, that's what,
Right.
whatever. But one of the things that I really try and encourage the ones that broke trust, and only when they thoroughly have believed this and have done some work, is I'll say, turn to your partner and say, I'm so sorry that I could not protect you from my brokenness.
Mm.
Because
Wow.
all the hurt party is seeing is you're a dirty bastard. You're a dirty, I'm sorry, I just swore, but
Yeah,
you're a
it's
dirty
okay.
dog. You're a monster. You're a cheater. You're this. Well, I don't think anybody's born to cheat. Now, don't get me wrong. There are studies out that talk about there's some biological links to infidelity, whatever, but I don't want to get into that right now. I don't think anybody comes into marriage or comes into life saying, "Oh, I can't wait to get married so I can cheat." No.
Yeah.
There's injuries, there's wounds, there's weaknesses, and I won't even get into the spiritual realm of,
Sure.
the enemy loves to break up relationships, but we won't go there right now. So can you turn to your partner and just say, I'm so sorry I could not protect you from my own brokenness?
Mm-hmm.
Can we start compassion, from this front?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was reminded while you were saying that of so many people who've been scammed online with these romantic partners because they so want to believe in love. And so many go unreported because of the guilt and shame that they feel that they let themselves be duped into this,
Mm.
oftentimes wiping out their life savings.
Oh yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
something, this is why there's a lot of people, one of the reasons, who are the once a cheater, always a cheater, dirty dog, monster, filthy, trash, disgusting, whatever, is because one of the things about betrayal trauma, especially betrayal trauma in reconciliation and rebuilding and all this other stuff, is we don't go, if we get divorced or if we leave the relationship, oh, we will shoot it from the rooftops. I left that dirty pig, let's go celebrate. But
Mm.
if somebody cheats on us and we reconcile and want to rebuild with them, we don't go from the rooftops and say, yes, my spouse cheated on me, we're working it out. So we don't, a lot of the masses don't hear those reconciliation stories.
Yes.
They
Right.
only hear
Very
you're a
true.
dirty dog, monster, bastard.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for doing this.
Absolutely. My
It's a
pleasure.
pleasure meeting you.
Yes. Yes.
And
If I could
Yeah, go ahead.
if I could just leave with one thing, I want to say this. If we're walking down the street and we get bit by a rattlesnake, do we go to the hospital or do we pick up that rattlesnake and inject the fangs into our arms multiple times? I say all the time, others give us pain, but we give ourselves suffering. We got to
Mm.
make sure that we don't pick up that snake and inject our veins over and over and over and
Yeah.
over.
Yeah. Good point. How can people get in touch with you?
I have, well, in my opinion, I have the simplest website. It's mrjrelationshipcoach.com. But I'm gonna tell you something. Even if people never want to see my face or hear my voice ever in life, please they can go to my website. I got a lot of free resources from articles to social medias to products to help heal. So again, mrjrelationshipcoach.com. But even if nobody ever wants to see me, talk to me, meet with me, please take advantage of my free resources.
Great. And we'll put that in the notes for this episode. Well, thank you
Thank
very
you
much.
both.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. J.
Thank you.
Welcome back. We hope you enjoyed that. We told you it was a very lively interview. And thank you, Mr. J.
Thank you, Mr. J, indeed. So just before we sign off today, we would like to remind you, buy our books.
Buy our books.
They're available anywhere you can get books, and especially Amazon. Oh yeah, by the way, folks, again, this is for the folks who made it through to the end of the podcast. These are our dedicated listeners. Reviews. I'm especially looking for reviews of Betrayal and Forgiveness. Give us, of course, what I'm looking for is 5-star reviews,
Of
but
course.
any sort of review, but especially 5-star reviews on Amazon would be very helpful. You don't even have to have bought the book on Amazon, though it's helpful if you do, because then that gives it kind of gooses the algorithm a bit. But please do that. And of course, reviews for your book as well.
Right. Blue Tent can use some new reviews. We've had a lot up there for a while, same one. So come on, review. Yeah. Also, if you have questions that you would like us to address on the air, or if you would like to be a guest on our podcast, you can go to our website, ctn7.com. That's the numeral 7, ctn7.com, and you can contact us there and
let us
do all
know.
those things like follow us, like us, write to us, let us know how you're doing.
all of the above. And so until next time,
Remember, be kind
don't panic.
and have faith.